the Lord had placed an exercise on my heart a few weeks ago, and I was coming up with excuses of why not to do it. And I was preparing for our study with the youth and going over the life of Moses. And as I was doing that, I came across this portion here, and I just felt like it was the Lord just reminding me of what He had placed on my heart before, and felt the urge to move forward with that. Due to time, I'll probably narrow it down a little bit, but Exodus chapter 3, and if you'll look at verse 7, so this is at the point in Moses' life where he's in Midian, and the Lord is, well, in this particular passage is the burning bush, but the Lord is speaking to Moses and bringing him, giving him the instructions of him wanting to go to Egypt to bring his people out of Egypt. And so in verse 7 of Exodus 3, we read, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmaster. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey." And then if you go down to verse 12, actually verse 11, "But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, But I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." Down to verse 17, "And I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites," and so on. Moses was making all these excuses of why he didn't want to go to Egypt. And we read in verse 7 that the Lord saw the affliction of his people. He sees the affliction that you and I may be going through, going back to what was shared already. He knows that those things are happening. And just like Moses, who took a long detour to get to the promised land, there's times where paths aren't always the way that we've intended them to go. And there's times where we had all these plans of how things were supposed to happen. And there's times where we don't think that the Lord is seeing us in our affliction and what we're going through. And yet here we read that the Lord saw what the Israelites were going through, the sufferings that they were going through. And although Moses was making all these excuses, and we sometimes make excuses, or sometimes things come up in our lives and we say, we can't do this, or I can't go through this, or I can't take this anymore. And yet, I'm reminded of the verse in Malachi 3:6, "I am the Lord, I do not change," right? He was with the Israelites. When he says, "I am with you," go, I am with you. That he's speaking to us as well. He doesn't change. He's just as well with us today as he was with the Israelites then. He just as well sees our afflictions today as he did with the Israelites. And so we have, as he mentioned in verse 17, "And I promise." What better words can you hear from the Lord himself? I promise. What an assurance. I promise that I will. He said, I'll be with you. Go. I promise I'll be there with you, and I will take you out of that affliction. It may come with a different path than we had intended, but he is faithful to his promises. Over in the next chapter, chapter 4, and verse 10, But Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue. Then the Lord said to him, Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute, or deaf, or seeing, or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Again, Moses still making excuses, and the Lord has to remind him. One of Moses' excuses was he wasn't an eloquent speaker. He had probably slow speech or something of that nature. I can't do this. Look at my deficiencies. And the Lord reminds him, who created you? Right? We go through these trials and we say, Lord, I can't take this on. And yet we have this promise that he will be with us. And he said, even with, can you think of anybody else in scriptures that was perhaps not eloquent in speech? I think of Paul in 2 Corinthians 10:10. I'll just read that verse real quick here. And you would never think of Paul, right? You see all the writings of Paul and all his endeavors that he went through, all the speaking before the courts and before all those he spoke to, and you think, how could Paul be one that perhaps wasn't eloquent in speech? In 2 Corinthians 10:10, we read, For they say his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is of no account. And this is, so you look at what the Lord did through Paul, marvelous works, and we have his promises. I know that there's and I've shared this with some of the local saints before. I some time ago I did a personal study on God's promises, and there were conflicting results of how many there are in scriptures, and I don't think we could come down to a real number, but the minimum was 2,500 promises found through scriptures. Some say even perhaps several thousand more than that, and yet he's faithful to each one of those. And how good it is that we can rest on those promises. And in regards to Joshua, which is the one who essentially followed in the footsteps of Moses in entering the promised land, even to Joshua in chapter 1, the Lord promises, go and I will be with you. And he repeats that through scriptures, go and I will be with you. And so we can rest on that no matter what afflictions we're going through, he is with us in those times. In the book of Psalms, in chapter 100, Psalm 100 and verse 5, for the Lord is good, his steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. I was thinking of our brother Andrew Poots made mention of the manna, going back to the story of Moses, and the manna is just a wonderful thing when you start studying that, but it created dependency on the Lord, didn't it? Every morning, day by day, give us this day our daily bread. Matter of fact, to follow up on that, in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 22, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. When we think of everything that we go through, that we see as trials, as difficulties, as a path that wasn't perhaps something we had in mind, and we look at these verses, we can be encouraged that he is faithful. His steadfast love endures forever. Think of that word forever. You know, man's finite mind can't fully comprehend the infinity of God's love, God's mercy, God's faithfulness. And as we go through these, I just want to encourage each one to be reminded that he is faithful. His mercies, every morning, his mercies are renewed. We have to create this dependency on him, and we have a promise from him that he will be with us.
We sing 230. 230. Oh Lord, when we the path retrace, which thou on earth hast trod, to